The most important is discipline. It's the most difficult. Talent, intuition, somehow finding that one's own path in music is one's own life. It's all about affinities with the muse. Of course, they're indispensable. But unfortunately, they are not sufficient. And that is something that has to be very clear, that there is no art without technique, no expression without discipline, no freedom from the ties unless you have worked out how to free yourself from the ties by the discipline, which teaches you why you have to be disciplined. Not just to observe it for pleasing a teacher, a parent, a friend, or oneself, because one has to have some drive, call it calling, call it ambition, and often this word is used so negatively. No. I think it is the humility to accept that everything has to be rethought. Nothing is achieved. The fact that you practiced well and played it well, and then what happens? You play it again and you don't play it well. Is it you, the situation, the changing instrument from one to another, acoustic situation, your own nervousness? The importance that the piece that you play takes for you to repeat, practice, detailed, and in all memorize, interiorize, terrifies you to mess it up because you praise it so much in your inner pantheon. And of course, you know for the famous pieces that they're already in the pantheon of the listeners. Performers or music lovers, professionals or amateurs, or just non-musicians who want to be told a story. Narrate them. Bring them to the style, genre, atmosphere, ecosystem of a given composer's world, or even the specific piece's world. So yes, you feel nervous because you don't want to mess it up. You don't want all these hours and hours and hours of solo practicing to have gone vain. Our intellect, our emotion, our reason, our innate sense to connect and complete the dots when we're almost lost or vulnerable at the edge of dropping from the piece, and then connecting to it somehow miraculously, perhaps because of the adrenaline of the moment when the public is your energy pill, as well as somehow also what scares you, because obviously that's what people call nervousness. I don't know what is the right word for that, but one way or the other, the domination of one's own fears has to be reason prevailing on emotion. But emotion is part of the expression, and not just because it's learned artificially. I will do this emotion in this bar and that emotion in that bar because that's what it says. Of course, you have to respect what it says, but it has to become what it means to you in order to be believable by them. So in this process, you might betray yourself if your nervousness betrays your intellect. Your memory of the piece becomes almost insecure because somehow your fingers, by the cognitive muscular memory, know where to go. But like a headless chicken, it doesn't go very far because at some point you take a realization and then you go, oh my God, where am I in the piece? I'm lost. The GPS stopped and all streets look alike. Or it just erased in front of me and I don't see what is the next thing, even if I practiced it repetitively and I know it. But it's just blocking because I'm too worried. And in fact, I'm afraid, fear of fear itself. How to fight that? Is it to imagine that you're not in public? To deny, like some kind of mental blocking of the stress? That would be good if it worked. I haven't seen it often work. I think, of course, the answer most likely for most people is I'll practice it more so I'll feel less nervous. But in fact, the practicing state of mind and of soul and of emotion isn't the same as the one in performance. And you cannot practice with an audience, but you play with an audience, for an audience. You play through the piece for the audience. You play through the audience for the piece. It's a mirroring system where the music that you read and heard comes out through your fingers, and you become the beam when you receive the light. And in this exchange, things are lost. Either the piano doesn't respond, the action is too heavy, the pedal doesn't hold, the acoustic is too dry or too resonant. Something is not always in the same parameters. Just like when you practice, you're more used to the same place, or if you even change places, it's usually not an acoustical place. It's usually a room and not a hall. And so the flow of the events, the length of the sound, the follow-up of the resonance and the follow-up of the long note with the short notes that follow, all this takes another dimension. It reveals itself to you phonically while you play in a hall, differently than when you practice. And to a certain, well, I don't want to say that really because I think it's a cliche, but it's true. When one practices, one shuts down one's ears because one repeats and repeats and repeats section by section. So the piece's expressive drive, meaning, emotion is sort of lost. You chew and pre-chew and over-chew, and then you play the piece from A to Z in front of people, and things that you don't expect happen better, and things that you worry somehow go by, you don't even notice them, and then all of a sudden things that always went without a trouble give you such problem that you might even almost stop. And that angers you innerly. It's like, why is my mind playing me tricks? So the virtuous expectation that the more I practice, the more I'll play better as I practiced doesn't hold, because in fact you practice to play with the unexpected of the stage nervousness with which you have to compensate through your knowledge or cognitive memory for sections where you might feel mentally a little lower tension of the intensity of the concentration than throughout the piece, because either it's another movement, it's another section, or it's a long piece, or it's a third piece on a program. There's always a moment where the intense attention that has to control and think ahead like a conductor over the orchestra, the piece that highlights it like high beams when you drive at night. You don't see much, but you see enough, and if you stop the light, then you'll crash. And that is exactly the feeling one has, is that the score in front of us, even if we don't look at it, is there to reassure us. So it's a lot of psychological ways. Some students are worried about the hammers of the piano and the concert grands when they perform without a stand, because they're distracted by the hammer's movements that they never see when they practice with a stand. Upright piano stands are lower than the grand piano stands, which are higher compared to the keyboard, so one doesn't hunch as for an upright piano when one reads the music. It's a lot about the cognitive aspect of the very apprehension of the space. The audience is in the edge of your eyesight because you most of the time positioned on stage sideways to the audience. So it's almost an intuitive fear about something can come from the side, like the blind spot when you drive. And if you were to face the audience like a singer, then you have to not see while looking at the people, but through them project something where your eyes see, but they don't look at the people. Singers are used to that because they face the audience most of the time. It depends on the stage director if they make them sometimes sing with their back to the audience, but generally. Pianists generally play with the side. Things like that might not be taken individually very disturbing, but somehow they are at different levels for different people. It's not all the same for each. But the discipline of practicing, of memorizing, of organizing the thoughts, of understanding the harmonic structure, the rhythmic structure, of understanding the path of the development of the composer's thought, modulations, variations, imitations, canons, fugal, chordal, whatever texture displays, fingerings, substitutions, pedaling, direction of line, phrasing, group of bars, tempo, pulse, rubato. All these elements can be said like that, but in reality they crash on the top of each other in some sections, and on some other sections one feels like plenitude, I'm just on it. It just plays by itself, and then boom. And I think that the discipline and the practicing is probably the key to the performance, not because you will transpose the practicing state of mind on the stage, because that would be impossible since it's not the same. Even if you pretend, you can't. But what it will, through this discipline of practicing short-term goals, I'll learn my left hand from memory until this bar for this hour. I won't do much more, but I'll do it in depth. Is chance that tomorrow that will still remain in my brain and I can accumulate another knowledge of the other hand or another voice or another layer or the other part. So I construct it like a construction game where I add elements without to lose the elements that I added because they aren't in the muscular memory or they aren't in my awareness of the hearing, and I shouldn't too early play both hands, but I should take more time to memorize the elements before I put them together. Verticality of the two hands for pianists is the panacea, how does it fit? But then once you do that, you bypass a lot of what makes it construct the two hands play this polyphonic or this chordal or whatever it is, poly elements. And I find that it's essential for a pianist is to learn to be disciplined in the patience of the repetitivity, but with intense attention. Because if you practice repetitively, mindlessly, because repetitivity often disconnects the focus and the concentration, so we think that our muscular memory then replaces, but in part it does, but it doesn't go far. And on stage, when you have these moments of floating state of your intellect, emotions, and all, you rely on your muscular memory, but then that doesn't go further. Where does this section lead? Where does this other section lead? So you have to have the formal memory, the detailed memory, the memory of the different elements that you can hear while you play and not hide under the carpet when there are too many, because they will always come up differently in the acoustics of the performance and basically trick you. So you have to be able to practice and sing or solfège or just la la la, whatever you can do, one part while playing the other, but not play always, because you don't want to only know it by the finger memory. You want to know it for the element that it is, an accompaniment, an inner voice, a secondary voice, an arpeggio, whatever it is. You want to know every section in depth beyond the detail. And then when you put it together, you have to be able, when you play, to follow all the elements and even anticipate them so that you can never be brought to a halt by a memory slip. And even when you have a moment of flotation, as I say on stage, you can still find yourself because you know where you are basically going. Okay, you jump over a hole and you go to the next thing. You know at least where you're going. It doesn't have just this, everything stops. Oh, so easy to say, I'm sorry. I realize that this is one of the most difficult things to individually develop for oneself. And I think the discipline of practicing with attention to each detail in the repetitivity, with short-term immediate resolutions of problems that hold in when you add the next, is the way. You have to be very patient, very focused, and very resilient. Never give up. So easy to say, so difficult to do.